Welcome to Carolina Catholic, the Southeast North Carolina show on Catholic Radio. I'm your host, Judi Paparozzi, the wife of Mario, the mother of Mario, Diana, and Daniel, and a proudly pro-life lawyer from New Jersey. And I have the unbelievable privilege, again, to speak to Father Jeffrey Kirby. And Father, welcome back to Carolina Catholic.
Thank you, Judi. It's good to be back on the show.
Thank you so much. We're here this time to talk about your newest book, We Are the Lord's, A Catholic Guide to Difficult End-of-Life Questions. I'm so glad you wrote this book. I read it as soon as I received it when I was away this summer, and I just reread it in preparation for the show. But Father, this show is dedicated to Our Lady, so would you kindly pray any Marian prayer to open our show?
Absolutely. I think we can go to the oldest and most deepest in our tradition, so let us pray. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Thank you so much, Father. And I'm so glad that you have, since we've talked, you've finished your doctorate.
Yes, right. Yes. Finally, it's done. Woo!
Well, my husband went through it, so I know what it's like to go through it. So, Father, let's just get a little bit of your background, and then we'll dive very deeply into this show. This is a show that's very important to me as somebody who's pro-life, because I'm always asked end-of-life questions. And I think it's become kind of a grave issue in our church because so many don't have any idea how to die as a Catholic. So I'm so glad that you wrote this book. So first of all, before we get into that, though, where are you working right now?
Yes, I'm the pastor at Our Lady of Grace parish, which is in Indian Land, South Carolina. It's actually one of the newest parishes in the Southeast. It's kind of an interesting demographic shift that we're closing churches in the Northeast and opening them in the Southeast. So the parish is only about 3 years old. I've been with them from the beginning of its status as a parish, and it's just amazing to see it grow. When I came here 3 years ago, we had a little under 300 families. We now have 1,000.
Congratulations.
So, that's just the growth of the Southeast. It's amazing to see. So I love being pastor here.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Father, I know a family that is parishioners, the Dooley family, Richard and Allison Dooley.
Yes, yeah, great people.
And tall, too.
Yes, right. Exactly.
Absolutely. We miss them so much in the Diocese of Raleigh, specifically in Wilmington, where they lived for many years. But I promised her a shout-out, so Allison, Father Kirby and I are doing a shout-out for you.
That's great.
So, Father, you haven't been ordained that long, right? Only 12 years, is that correct?
Yes. Sometimes it feels like it's been 25, but no.
Reading your CV and your bio, you should be about 80.
That's gracious. No, I've enjoyed every year, and actually I just celebrated my anniversary in late July.
Congratulations. We're blessed to have you, obviously. And you also teach somewhere. Where is that?
I do. So my parish is about 40 minutes from Belmont Abbey College, which is in the greater Charlotte area. So twice a week in the afternoons I head over and teach an intro course to freshmen and sophomores, intro to the scriptures. So it's an interesting experience because they keep me fresh and they help me to kind of see what's going on in the culture, and sometimes they just have me laughing the whole drive home. So, so it's a good experience. I enjoy doing it.
And we're so privileged to have Belmont Abbey in our state. It's just such a wonderful place, faithful to the magisterium and so forth. So you've also written a lot of books, even since the last time we talked, which is December of 2016. You've knocked out about 4 or 5 more books. I'm amazed. So first of all, we're going to be talking about the one that the show is about, We Are the Lord's, A Catholic Guide to Difficult End-of-Life Questions. But you wrote another book this year about a personal retreat. Tell us a little bit about that book.
Yes, that was more of a spiritual work, as you were indicating. It took the masterpiece of Father Jean-Pierre de Caussade, The Abandonment to Divine Providence, and it took that masterpiece and broke it down into a 6-day personal retreat under the title Be Not Troubled, and that was from Ave Maria Press. And it basically, that masterpiece from de Caussade it contains so much spiritual wisdom, and honestly, he's not a big name in terms of popularity in our spiritual tradition among the few faithful, but he is a great one in our tradition in terms of his wisdom and contribution. Some would say he's one of the top 5 spiritual masters of our tradition. So I just felt that the masterpiece, which can be cumbersome at times or difficult to read for people who are busy or don't have a basic theological background, so I took it and just broke it down to 6 days. in the book, and it matches the 6 titles, the 6 chapters of the masterpiece. And so it was an attempt to make the spiritual tradition closer or more accessible, because, Judi, what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing, I'm sure many are seeing this, is we are witnessing a massive exodus of Christians, baptized Christians, who are leaving the Christian faith in order to pursue Buddhism or Eastern mysticism or neo-Gnosticism and these various things. And they're doing it because, as Pope Benedict XVI has written, that because they're existentially bored with Christianity, and part of that is the fault of the shepherds. Like, we haven't really been presenting the spiritual tradition or showing how its beauty and its wisdom can help us in our lives and in our drawing closer to God. So that work was a small effort to kind of address that tide and maybe make a counter shift in showing people how much we really do have in the church.
Well, that's beautiful, because not only are people leaving because of what you called it, Pope Benedict called it existential boredom.
Yes.
But also because we've had so many other things going on that have alienated a lot of people. I'm talking about, obviously, the Catholic Church, but that's wonderful that you're addressing it. And you also, in 2018, wrote another book, God's Search for Us, 5 Lessons from a Missing Coin.
Yes, yeah, that was a fun book. That was a lot of that was from the intro portion of my doctoral thesis. I basically took the parable of the missing coin from Luke's Gospel and basically just developed the 5 movements of that parable and described those in light of God's movement towards us. We forget in the West that one of the foundational beliefs that created Western culture, was the belief that long before we searched for God, God was already searching for us. And that the title, of course, indicates that. And the book develops that theme that God is the one, and this is a radical claim of the Judeo-Christian tradition, that God is the one who searches for us. And we look for Him, we are simply responding to His initiative and looking for us.
Well, it sounds wonderful. And you also, skipping a little bit, you've written books about the Beatitudes and prayer, but I was very interested in this because, I love Rome, I love Italy because I'm an Italian citizen, I have family there that my listeners know about. But you write a book about St. Peter's and the Vatican, and
yes.
You also were a tutor to the Pontifical Swiss Guard, which is interesting. I know somebody else who does that, a woman named Katusha in Rome. But that's so interesting. Did you do tours as a student of Rome?
I did. So exactly. So both of those were kind of opportunities for seminaries at the Pontifical North American College. That's where I went to seminary. And so being a tour guide of St. Peter's and the holy places, and then for those who had some education background, I was a school teacher before I went to seminary. I taught high school. So for some of us, we were given the opportunity to go in and help some of the Swiss Guard who were interested to learn basic English expressions that they might encounter with English-speaking pilgrims to the Vatican. So it was an incredible experience walking into the barracks of the Swiss Guard, and sitting down and getting to know 6 to 8 of the Swiss Guard relatively well, and teaching them some English expressions and basic grammar.
That's wonderful. I'm not going to ask what the expressions are because I'm sure they've heard them all. I've been to tours many times there. And you also wrote about one of my absolute lifetime favorite saints, Saint Maria Goretti.
Yeah, she's powerful. That book was written. That was a labor of love, truth be told, because I was pretty deep in research at that point on the doctoral work. And Maria Goretti's body, of course, was traveling throughout the United States. It's the first time her body had come to the United States. It was a gift that was requested by Pope Francis after his apostolic visit. And so the publisher reached out to me, Tan Press, and said, look, the last book we have of Maria Goretti is from the 1950s, and we'd like maybe something more current or contemporary about the saint that could help get the story of her life out. So as a seminarian, I visited Nettuno, where her shrine is, many times. I joke in the book, in part because it was a cheap train ticket and her shrine is right by the beach, but also because her shrine is right by the American cemetery in Anzio.
Right.
Of course, from the major battles of World War II. So actually, I would go there a lot with friends, and in part because it was inexpensive, and the seminaries would have a lot of money, but we'd like to go. We went to the American cemetery, visit the shrine of the saint, and of course spent some time at the beach or having a nice meal. But because that there was a spiritual friendship that developed, well, long before I ever thought I'd ever be writing a book about her, I was taking notes, personal notes, just about her life, or people would tell stories in the city or the town about her, and so on. So when I was requested this, there was something that could be done, as I can't write a full biography. I'm not competent. I don't have the time for that. But I do have these notes that I can write a spiritual application of her life, giving a survey summary and then applying it. And they loved the idea, and that gave birth to the book. And I was at a conference a couple of years ago in Chicago, and a guy came up to me, a huge guy, and kind of puts his finger in my face and says, "Are you the one that wrote that book about Maria Goretti?" I thought, oh no, where's this going? And I said, well, yes, sir. He goes, "I love that examination of conscience." Because each chapter concluded with an examination of conscience. "I love that examination of conscience." I'm like, "I'm so glad you liked it, sir." But I've heard from multiple people that each chapter, of course, ends with the examination of conscience. That was the part that really struck them, which made me happy because it was written as a spiritual work. It wasn't meant as a full biography, but sharing nuggets of her life and then applying them and saying, now let's look at our discipleship. So that was a challenging but fun book to write.
She's been one of my favorite saints, like I said, my whole lifetime, and that was the example my mother raised me as a little girl with what she did. And plus, I worked in the criminal justice system for many years, and I just she was always in my heart as I worked with these guys, because she taught so much forgiveness as well as on top of everything else. She taught so much the forgiveness of her killer, right? Her rapist and killer.
Absolutely, yes. And of course, Alessandro, who took her life, of course, experienced a major conversion in part by her intercession, and himself died, as a gardener in a Franciscan monastery, and was present for the canonization ceremonies. He wasn't actually at the mass; his car broke down. But
oh no!
But But he was at the ceremonies. There's a great picture of Alessandro with Assunta Goretti, who was Maria Goretti's mother,
right.
at the festivities. A powerful story, as you were saying. Mercy, purity, virtue, beautiful, inspiring story.
And forgiveness, it's just amazing. So you also, and just real quickly, you also have written some children's books with a sister, correct?
Actually, a school principal.
Sorry.
Marguerite, she goes by Peggy Word. We paired up with a illustrator here in South Carolina, Alice Judd, and Peggy brought in the educational theory and pedagogy. I had the theology, and Alice had the artistic ability. We were able to write 3 books on the 3 principal vocations in the life of the church. It was the priesthood, the religious life, and married life. And there are, of course, many people say, well, what about deacons, or what about single for the Lord? Yes. I said, you write them. I was like, after 3, we were done. It's like, this is not an easy work.
Well, it's wonderful that there are children's books available with those 3, from going over those 3 vocations so beautifully. Which is great. Amen. So let's talk about your history. It's pretty long, even though it's all happened in, the last 20 years. You've really gone to school a lot, haven't you, Father, starting in Steubenville?
Yes, I tell you, I think education is so important. So Steubenville was the start. I'm so happy. I saw recently that Father Dave Pavanka was named the new president, and I'm very grateful for that. So Father Dave, he was ordained in the field house when I was a student there.
Wow.
So I was an underclassman. So my time in Steubenville has radically shaped my own discipleship and my understanding of discipleship, my priestly ministry, my preaching, so many things. I'm so grateful for my time there. As Mark Twain said, don't let schooling get in the way of your education.
Right.
And Steubenville was very good in balancing a solid classroom education with a solid formation by way of life in terms of student culture and various opportunities. So very grateful.
Now, did you go to Steubenville on your own? You weren't part of a diocese at this point when you got your Bachelor of Arts in History and your Master's of Arts in Philosophy. Were you planning discerning the priesthood at this point, or?
No, I was thinking, the priesthood had always kind of been in my mind, as I hope it would be in any Catholic young man's mind, but no, I was thinking at that point actually of law school, so I had different ideas. As I joke when people ask that question, I said, no, it wasn't part of the diocese. I got the student loans to prove it. Yeah, I was a regular student and was in a regular dorm, dated, had friends, and really had not thought seriously about the priesthood until graduate school, in a serious way.
So when you graduated from Steubenville in 2001, you started in the Greg, which is the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome, in 2002. Now, was this the beginning of your, because you were living at the Pontifical North American College, so you obviously were going to be ordained in the Diocese of Columbia, South Carolina at this point?
That's right. So what happened was I finished, so Franciscan had this great program where as a senior you could double up on classes, so I was able to stay and finish up the master's degree in philosophy in a shorter amount of time than usual. And so then after that, I taught high school for a year at Bishop England High School in Charleston, South Carolina. And really it was a grad school where more and more I thought, do I really want to be in law? I was looking at civil rights and human rights and so on, and it was always something very important to me, still is. And but the more I just kind of was thinking about it, the more I just felt the Lord tugging at my heart and so on. So after grad school, I took a year, taught high school, and was seriously thinking about it. That's when I applied to the Diocese of Charleston, and then they sent me to the NAC seminary over in Rome, and then that was it. And got thrown in with the Jesuits at the Greg. So I was like, well, if I stay Catholic after this, I'm all right. So,
Well, so you were going to be incarnated in the Diocese of Charleston, but you ended up being incarnated in the Diocese of Columbia. Is that correct, or is that the same?
It's the same. Actually, we're kind of an oddity in that the Diocese of Charleston is the entire state of South Carolina.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that because we have two here, right? Okay.
Exactly. Yep. So, in fact, it's weird because, North Carolina has two, Georgia has two, South Carolina is one. So in terms of our province of the Carolinas and Georgia, we're the only one that is still one state diocese.
Okay. And for some reason you were sent right to the Pontifical North American College and the Gregorian. Isn't that kind of unusual for any diocese to send somebody who's just coming into his first year of seminary to Rome?
Exactly, yeah. Yes, in fact, if I, later in my priesthood, I was a vocations director, and if I had been the vocations director, even with my own case, I would have strongly stressed and encouraged the bishop to give a year or something, a pre-theology year or something. But while I may have given counsel, even counter-counsel in my own situation, I was actually very grateful that the Bishop of Charleston at the time was understanding, because in his mind, he knew Steubenville is like, you've gotten spiritual formation, you have a master's degree in philosophy, how am I going to send you to a pre-theology program to sit and do philosophy that is below the level that you have been studying? And so he took the leap on my behalf, and said, we're just going to send you to first theology. But as you're saying, Judi, that's rare. And in fact, what happened was 2 years into my time with the NAC, they realized I had to do a pastoral year because, in terms of guidelines and so on, like I would have been ordained a deacon within 3 years. That's just unheard of. So 2 years after my second year of seminary, I was asked to do a pastoral year at a parish here in South Carolina, and then was set back so that I would have more time to prepare for ordination. So yeah, it was interesting, but it was a great ride. I'll tell you, walking in as a new seminarian in first theology, and of course the formation team of the seminary expects the seminarian to have learned things along the way that were assumed, and and I didn't know them. So it took a good couple of months to adjust the seminary culture.
I imagine. Now, Father, a lot of people don't understand that the NAC, the Pontifical North American College, is not where you study, it's where you're formed. And then you go to one of the pontifical universities. Can you explain how an American seminarian, how he is formed at the NAC, but he actually goes to somewhere else, so another school?
Yeah, so it is very interesting for us because in the United States, the term college means a place of learning, an academic institution. In Europe, college means a residence, perhaps of students, but it's a residence. So North American college is a residence. Of course, it's more than that. It's also a seminary, a place of formation. So that's where we would live. We'd have prayer. We would have conferences in terms of formation. That would be the entire residence and formation program. But our academic studies were held at a university. So, and there are multiple options. So the Angelicum is one, the Gregorian, where I went, is another, Santa Croce, another. So you would have morning prayers and mass and breakfast and so on, and then you would head to class. And then attend class and come back in the late afternoon for additional prayers and community activities and stuff like that. So, yeah, so two different institutions. So someone says, well, so you went to the NAC? Yes. But you were at the Gregorian? Yes. You're right. They're like, what? Like, wow, they say, wow, you went to two colleges at the same time. It's like, well, no, the NAC is a seminary. It's not an academic institution. It's not a university. So that could be a little confusing, but I think that most people who might be familiar with the British system or other systems in Europe, they can understand, oh yeah, that's the collegio, that's the residence. But the university is distinct from that. So, yeah, it's a little confusing for us Americans.
Well, I understand it now only because I've been there, and you have to admit the NAC does have the absolute best view of Rome in the world. Amen. I mean, it's just the best.
Amen. Amen.
And then you went on to get a Master of Bioethics. Was that kind of a new, and that was at a different university, Athenaeum, the Queen of the Apostles? That's a kind of a new master's degree, isn't it? Or new at the time you were starting it?
It was. Now, I just joked about being at two institutions at the same time, but when I finished first cycle, so it's interesting for us because also in the pontifical system there are three cycles, three levels. The first cycle is 3 years as the STB, the Bachelor of Sacred Theology, and the second cycle is a licentiate, the third cycle is the doctorate. And the pontifical system, they really see it as 3 cycles of the same formation. So the first cycle was 3 years at the Gregorian with the Jesuits. That was basic theology. It's like the boot camp of dogma, of basic theology. And then after my third year, you start your specialized training. So I was asked to study moral theology. I went to the Holy Cross University for my licentiate. But at the same time, I was asked to enroll in as you were indicating, Judi, a new program at that time, which was a master's degree in bioethics at Regina Apostolorum, so Queen of Apostles, which was a different university. So in spite of my previous joke, I really was at 2 different universities at one point. And both those were 2-year programs. So I started, I had my pastoral year, and then I went back, and I finished the licentiate at Holy Cross and the master's in bioethics at Regina Apostolorum. My
goodness, and then eventually in 2016 you finished your doctorate of sacred theology at Santa Croce, Holy Cross, right?
Yes. I was so glad to be able to finish. That was a real gift on behalf of my bishop to allow me to go and finish, because when you finish second cycle, there's this drive to just wrap it up, because unlike the American system where the doctorate is this massive independent program, in the pontifical system, the doctorate really is seen as the crowning achievement of these 3 cycles of study, and its program is designed as a complement. The real hard part in terms of the cycles is the second cycle, like the licentiate where you do all the work. It's a license, ultimately a license to teach,
right?
And the doctorate really is just a few additional seminars and the dissertation. I don't mean to lessen the work. It's hard work, but it's different from the American system where the doctorate is this massive program independent of everything else. In the pontifical system, they really see it as a series of cycles.
And when you did your doctorate, though, you did concentrate on something that we're going to be leading into today, which is your new book about medical personnel. So your dissertation was facilitating a program of conscience formation among medical personnel. Am I seeing the nexus here that with your master's in bioethics and with your doctoral dissertation, this basically led you into dealing with these really difficult issues that we're all facing now? Yes,
very much. And the case study that was used for a portion of The dissertation was a Catholic hospital that had recently merged with a nonprofit secular hospital, and it was assessing the responsibility of the Catholic Party to the nonprofit party in terms of explaining Catholic doctrine or basic principles of moral discernment, and how is that done. So obviously the work was a broader work, but that was one portion, one chapter of the work was applying it to that exact situation. So now how does the Catholic Party in a new healthcare system explain to a nonprofit secular entity the principles of moral discernment that have to be agreed upon in order for the partnership to work? So it was an interesting work, but one that was dear to my heart. My heart's always been education. So in terms of allowing and being able to bring in a whole aspect of conscience formation and applying it in a helpful way in terms of the church's work today was an extra blessing.
Well, it's very interesting too, Father, because I've been a pro-life lawyer for too many years to count, but we always think about it as about the abortion issue, and honestly, the abortion issue is actually very clear. It's, you cannot take innocent life. So that's really clear. But what I found, even when my own mother died and I was the proxy for my mother, I was the healthcare person, it's very confusing. And so many people are not making good end-of-life decisions as Catholics. And they end up not dying as Catholics, or somebody in the family makes sure that they don't die under, really embracing Catholic teaching on end-of-life issues. Have you found that in your research in writing this book?
Yes. I think that, there are different levels and people, vary. And what I have found is that the connection between end of life. So what's interesting about the book I wrote was, obviously from the title, We Are the Lord's, that very clearly that this was not going to be a philosophical work or, we have that language in terms of the broader culture, in terms of, laws in a pluralistic society. We have that language. But I wanted to address specifically believers. So I say right from the very beginning, we have this other language we can use in different fora, different situations, but I'm going to be using the language of faith because I'm going to assume that I'm speaking to believers. And I found that the level to which a person takes their discipleship is the level to which they will be open to the church's teachings on the end of life. Because I say very clearly that, echoing the Catechism of the Catholic Church, that our dying process is the last gift in this life that we will give to the Lord. And what gift will that be? Will it be disobedience? Will it be negativity? Or will it be one given with joy and redemptive suffering? So what you're saying, Judi, I think that there's so many different aspects of that, but I have found that people are either confused, uncertain. They can also oftentimes be offended, which is interesting. But I have found in terms of trying to understand the threat, like what's behind these different reactions, and to realize that ultimately it comes down to their relationship with Jesus Christ before the dying process. So, I use the image of the wise virgins a lot in the Gospels. Of course, we hear the parable that the wise virgins prepared their oil. They kept it ready for when the groom came. The unwise virgins, they wasted their oil. And I tell people, prepare now for a holy death. From the time we're 7 or 8 years old, we're taught to pray for a holy death. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us in this now and at the hour of our death. This is in our tradition to prepare well, and yet my impression is that a lot of believers don't take their discipleship seriously, and in effect are wasting the oil, the grace of God in this life.
We're talking to Father Jeffrey Kirby, who has his licentiate and doctorate in sacred theology. He is the pastor of Our Lady of Grace Parish in Indian Land, South Carolina, and he has written a book on end-of-life questions called We Are the Lord's, a Catholic Guide to Difficult End-of-Life Questions. Well, Father, based on the point that you just made, I think it's really important for people to put it in the context, not your book, but this whole issue, in the context of what society is selling. And a lot of what society is selling is, I want to die with dignity. the quality of life matters more than a lot of my Christian principles. And I think that's why you said some people even get mad or whatever. You know, another battleground, like there is in front of an abortion clinic where I stand every week, another battleground is actually in the hospitals and in places of hospice, because there's that overwhelming cultural preference to die with dignity. So, but, you know, I want to die as a Catholic. And that's why I love this book so much. And by the way, you say it's an easy-to-read chapter question and answer book. It's so easy to read, but it's filled with tremendously deep theological teachings, which I had to like sit and read and read and read again until I was able to give the cliff notes to myself on this book. So you really do first address our relationship with God and ourselves, and that we are all not a burden. There's no such thing as a person being a burden. And I thought that was such a beautiful way to start this book. So tell us about your first chapter, Life as a Gift.
Yeah, so I think that, you know, it's the best way to start. Of course, in the intro of the book, I mentioned, I was like, if you're picking up this book and you're in an emergency situation, you are standing beside the bed at a hospital, or you're in conversation with a hospice nurse, and there are pressing decisions that have to be made, I say go directly to Chapter 7. Of course, Chapter 7 is a Q&A that provides the 25 top questions from my experience as a priest, as a moral theologian, as a consultant to a Catholic hospital. So here are the big questions. So if someone's I just need to know an answer to this, then go to Chapter 7, boom. However, if you have time, as I hope people have gotten the book or a book like that and have given themselves the time, then what I wanted to do in the other chapters, as you described, Chapter 1, you know, that life is a gift, is develop the whole panorama, the principles, so we can understand why the church will teach what she does, and then what, for example, what's provided in Chapter 7. So the first one is life is a gift, and as you were mentioning, Judi, like something that has to be addressed right away. You know, this language of burden, it's become very seductive, you know, and people have bought it, you know, and I tell people, look, they say, I don't want to be a burden to my children. I'm like, well, too late. You know what I mean? It's like, you've been a burden to them since the day they were born, you know? And, of course, joking, but making the point that love is about burden, and there are burdens in terms of care, you know, to be sleep deprived, to have to work all day and then go and take care of your elderly mother, or to provide for a sick sibling and so on like that. That is, the care can be burdensome. But we have to identify that it's the care. It's not the person. People are not burdens, right? And that's the part that we have to distinguish, you know, like, and St. Paul tells in Galatians that we should happily carry the burdens of others, especially those that we love, you know, and the ones that have loved us. So I sometimes tell our older parishioners, I'm like, no, you burden your children. You burden your children. You will bring out their best. You know, like you took care of them in the circle of life. It's their turn to take care of you. You will teach them patience and kindness and selfless service. Do not rob your children, your adult children, of this opportunity to take care of you. You know, but it's a seductive language, and people have bought it. And I want to step back and just look at our culture and say, look, when we start accepting it as a culture, we just have to acknowledge that we have abandoned one of the principal tenets of the Judeo-Christian tradition, which built our civilization, which is basically that the sick and the suffering are not burdens, but are blessings and opportunities for us to provide service, right? So that's an aspect that has been forgotten. It's like, we change that, we're changing a core tenet, a foundational belief of our very civilization. That's one thing. And of course, with dignity has become a synonym for quality of life.
Right.
Like, as Catholics, we acknowledge the quality of life. There's a part of that. There's an assessment, especially when we go to what's morally obligatory, what's morally optional. But we would never say that quality of life is a synonym for dignity. It's like, no, like, as we assert, dignity is given to all of us. Like, it's the great equalizer. You know, it's you know, all of us have dignity, whether it's we're unborn or we have special needs or we're terminally ill or whatever it might be. Nothing gave us that dignity in this life. I didn't even give it to myself. That dignity is a gift from God, from our Creator, and nothing can take that away from us. So people say, "Oh, I just want to die with dignity." I said, "Well, good luck. Good news." You know, it's like, we're going to die with dignity, right? You're going to. Nothing can take this dignity from you, right? You will die with dignity, no matter what happens or what condition you might be in. You are going to die with dignity. So these are just some challenges or pokes in terms of some of this cultural language that we have really kind of just accepted in a really terrifying way.
Well, you know, another thing about chapter 1, and we'll skip to chapter 2 in a second, is you talk about the complementarity of body and soul. And a lot of times in a medical decision, we don't think about the soul, do we? We think about the body.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the points I try to emphasize in the book as well, is that, you know, there's a whole spiritual component of this. And what I find very interesting is just empirically, so just by science alone, the natural sciences, we now know the importance of a person's, their spirit or their emotional health. So if a person feels better and is more uplifted, that they are more likely to recover quicker, they're more likely to have less need for medication and the side effects. So there are glimpses, even within the medical sciences, that help us to understand the importance of the soul in terms of our health, and certainly in terms of our moral decision-making. That, yes, like, this is not simply the body. This is not just some, chunk of flesh that we somehow have to drag around and try to manipulate as best we can in order to avoid all possible pain. No, there's a soul here, and the body and soul work together.
Right. So we've gone to chapter 2, which is about redemptive suffering. And you don't hear too many people talking, unless you're in my age group, 60 and up. You know about redemptive suffering because your mother told every time you stubbed your toe to offer it up, which I heard thousands of times. But we don't see ourselves as part of God's plan for redemption. Most of us don't even think like that. So tell us a little bit about the importance of redemptive suffering and how it's actually part of God's plan for the redemption of all humanity.
Yes. One of the things that I emphasize with the freshmen I teach is, it's like, if you want the whole story of the human family, the story of salvation, I can give it to you in 3 words. Good, fallen, redeemed. And I stress that, of course, in terms of teaching of the scriptures. And I think when it comes to suffering, we have the same, is that we are good. I tell people, like, when they say, my loved one died, it's not fair. You're completely right. We were never meant to die. We were never meant to suffer. This was not a part of the original inheritance given to us by God, right? That was the goodness, right? The original justice, we call it in theology. But then there was the fall. And the fall introduced massive chaos to creation. That's why we have natural disasters. It brought chaos into our nature. Our intellect wages war against our passions and vice versa. We are inclined to what we know is evil, even though we know it's evil. And the list goes on. This is the consequence of the fall, where, things that were not intended are suddenly now consequences of the fall. For example, the corruptibility of our bodies. This is why we suffer. This is why we will die, because of the consequences of sin. So in terms of redemption, it's like, well, what heals the consequences of sin? Well, it's grace. It's the work of God. It's the work of redemption. So the more we cooperate with the work of Christ, the more we bring healing to ourselves, the more we become instruments of healing to our world. So once we put it in this context, so when you're suffering, God did not intend for you to suffer. This is the consequence of the fall. But to be able to take that suffering and now in Christ to unite it with Him in offering it to the Father, what was an evil, a consequence of the fall, now becomes a means of redemption. And the more we do that, the more we ourselves experience the effects of redemption, the more we become instruments of redemption. So it can be a very complicated concept, but I'm thinking it doesn't have to be. Simple words, good, fallen, redeemed, right? We were good, we were not meant to suffer. Fallen, we do suffer. What are we going to do with it? We're going to complain, fall into self-pity, become bitter. Those are options. Give in to fear and anger. Those are options too. Or this fallen state can lead us to redemption. And the key there is the workings of grace, to allow God's grace into our lives and then through us to other people.
Now, how do we apply this to the issue we're talking about today, end of life? Jesus actually went through all of this and accepted all forms of suffering, etc., not only in his body, but in his soul. He was humiliated, rejected, whatever. How does this all tie into what your book is about?
Yes, I think that, the dying process is a rich harvest in terms of redemptive suffering. Now, I'm not talking about the person suffering to the point where they reach intense agony or, the edges of desolation or despair. I mean, there is a proper place for pain medication. But there's also a place where, we allow and freely exercise for ourselves the decisions made by us to say, I can wait on that medication, or, medication's given, it takes a while to take effect or something. Whatever suffering we might have, to be able to say, I'm going to offer this up with Christ, and that becomes, again, then a means of grace, a means of redemption. So I think the dying process is, again, a rich harvest. And I tell people when they're dying, offer this, and pray for your family members who are away from the church. Pray for the younger members of your family who are just starting, their families with young children. Pray for priestly vocations. You know what I mean? Like, offer up this. Like, do not waste the power of this suffering. And it resonates with people, and I think it especially resonates with believers. Like, oh yeah, that's right. Even this is a part of my discipleship. Even this is a part of the work and the mission that God has given me.
So now moving on to chapter 3, you talk about dying with dignity. That's the name of your chapter. But really our dignity is already assumed because we have it from the moment we were created, because Jesus gives us dignity, correct?
Exactly. And just to emphasize that point as well, like, that dignity is inherent. It's like saying that, someone could take away my heart, or could take away, something that's intrinsic to me. Like, it cannot. Our dignity is bestowed upon us. And I think that we've allowed this word to be hijacked, redefined, and people now speak about, dignity as if it's given by the Supreme Court, or dignity as if it's bestowed by Congress, or dignity as if it's given by some hospice nurse, or even given by ourselves. These are all incomplete. Our dignity is given by our Creator, and it can be taken away by no one, not even ourselves.
Yes. And I'm going to just skip a little bit to the judgment before God, which is chapter 5. My father, when he died, my father was in the seminary before his health derailed his priestly vocation, and he went on to get married and have 8 children. But his last 10 days of his life, he had a heart attack. He was so terrified, Father. And I'm thinking, my goodness, you did your divine office every day of your life. Why are you so afraid of your judgment before God? It wasn't the pain. He was afraid. But that was very hard for us to deal with, because he was such a good man and brought so many people back to the faith, or to the faith. But we're all a little terrified of the judgment before God. I mean, that's the only thing I'm really worried about, because I don't care how I die almost. I just want to be ready for Jesus. So how do we do that so we're not as afraid as my dad was, and not as afraid as even I am?
Yeah, so first, I would, hope that no one would have the level of terror, in the dying process. As you indicate, I think there is a healthy sense, of fear, in the sense of profound reverence and readiness, reverence for God, readiness for judgment that we're all called to have. I will say, Judi, that my pastoral experience is the exact opposite. Like, I wish I had more parishioners that at least had some sense of judgment. Most people now think the only thing you have to do to get to heaven is die. Right? No one wants to talk about judgment or purgatory or hell. Like, most people, it's like, no. In fact, I've even noticed that the term heaven is out of vogue now. People simply say, he's gone to a better place. Well, I don't want to go to a better place. I want to go to heaven. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't want to go to Hawaii.
Right. So I think that first the majority of the faithful have to retrieve the sense of judgment and readiness. And I think for those who have, fear, my encouragement would be that we go to a God who's always been searching for us and is eagerly awaiting the homecoming. And while we should, have a healthy sense of fear because of our sinfulness, that should be overwhelmed by an immense trust. I love praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet with the dying. I think it gives incredible consolation and peace because of its emphasis on mercy. We have a God who loves us. He's not out to get us. He will do anything to have us with him for all eternity. And we've seen that reflected in his life, his actions among us. We've seen it in the death of his Son, the resurrection of the Lord Jesus. So I think we can have trust. But there should be a healthy fear as well.
It's interesting because my mother died about 8 or 9 years later, and she was supposed to die the minute they took her off the breathing machine. And it was at noon, and she lasted the 3 hours of the Passion, and then we started the Divine Mercy at 3 o'clock, and she died during the hour of Divine Mercy. And I just thought, Mom, you raised 8 kids Catholic, you did it right, you had Alzheimer's, but God knew what he was doing. At the moment you died perfectly with your family around you, just repeating the Divine Mercy Chaplet over and over again. So I'm a firm believer. There's a ministry here that my friend runs at our parish, and she does the Divine Mercy with the dying. So it's just, I totally agree with you on that. On to the next chapter, which is one of the tougher ones, the principles of discernment. And this is really tough. This is the core of everything that you're talking about in the book, about how to discern what to do at the time when you're dealing with end-of-life decisions. So you have 3 principles. Can you just basically tell us the 3 principles of discerning end-of-life questions? And I want to direct people, buy the book. We're talking to Father Jeffrey Kirby, who has written a fabulous book, and this is from a person who has dealt with this issue for years as a lawyer. We Are the Lord's, a Catholic Guide to Difficult End-of-Life Questions. So what are the 3 principles of discernment when it comes to end-of-life questions, Father?
Yeah, so as we approach the question of discernment, if I can begin just with a clarification in terms of discernment, because this word has been used a lot recently. And I want to stress that for we who are believers, the word discernment does not mean that I'm weighing pros and cons and looking for the best possible state of affairs for me or for my benefit, and so on. That is not discernment. Discernment is that we actively engage God and the truths that he has revealed to us, and we seek the best possible way to apply his teachings to a specific state of affairs, And the Catechism of the Catholic Church will say the one criterion for discernment is the beatitude of heaven. That everything we do is to help us and those around us get to heaven. So I think that context just helps us. So it's not as if moral truth is up for grabs or that we can just determine whatever we want. No, there's actually a very specific understanding of discernment in the Christian tradition. So with that said, in terms of care or end-of-life care, 3 main principles. The first is that, when we enter discernment, it's like entering a baseball field. Right? There's a lot of movement and possibilities of plays and setups and so on. But there's a fence around that field, right? And the first principle of discernment is precisely that fence. That there is a moral parameter, there's an objective order. Objective means outside of myself. I'm the subject. The object is outside of me. There's an objective order. I didn't create it. I can't manipulate it. If I want peace, I obey it. I follow it. This objective order, right? I can call an oak tree a tulip, but it's going to cause a lot of problems in my life because an oak tree is not a tulip, right? So if I respect the objective order, then I follow the tranquility of order, which is peace. So there's this objective order, a series of moral truths that cannot be violated, or else we have left the realm of discernment and have entered the realm of disobedience, of dissension, right? So, for example, needlessly suspending nutrition, hydration. That's overstepping the fence. Like that is violating the moral order, the moral truths of our faith. Okay, that's the first principle, is to realize that there is this fence. We are not the measure of what is right and wrong. And what we want or what we will is not necessarily the right thing.
Right.
And again, we have parameters. So that's the first part. Second is, evaluating our human vocation and our specific vocation. This is so essential in terms of our discernment. So first of all, our human vocation. There's certain things we do for ourselves and for other human beings, just because we share our human nature. So if someone's hungry and I'm able, I give them food. If someone is lonely and I'm able, I give them fellowship. These are things we are called to do because of our human vocation. Our human vocation also helps me understand things about myself, my temperament, my weaknesses, my capacity for pain, and so on. So our human vocation is very important. This is especially important, for example, with nutrition hydration, which is the battleground. That's the battleground. I tell everyone that's the battleground is artificially administered nutrition hydration. And, the rule of thumb is if you're going to suspend nutrition hydration when the body can still assimilate it, and it's the suspension of nutrition hydration that causes death, then that is euthanasia.
Absolutely.
Now, there are times when nutrition hydration can and should be suspended, when the body can no longer assimilate it. The organs are shutting down. It causes harm to the patient. It ceases to do a good.
Right.
It can be suspended. So, but we have to place that all within this context of our human vocation, that even when the person is unable to feed themselves, I still give them food. Say, well, but they're dying anyway. Yeah, but they're not dead yet, and their body can still take the food. We don't starve dying people to death. Similarly is, well, the person's dying, so I'm not going to change their adult diaper. That would be cruel, right? Or I'm not going to rotate their body anymore to prevent bed sores because they're going to die anyway. That's barbaric, So there are certain things that we do in light of our human vocation that is called out of us, right? And then from that, our specific vocation. In particular, who are we responsible for? So, for example, if a person's married and has small children, the person, is responsible for the care of their elderly parent. If they perform a pivotal and essential service to a community, if they're the only doctor in a vast region, and so on. All of these are actually factors in discerning, moral decisions. Because at the end, we're trying to get to the third principle, which is this morally obligatory or morally optional? Is this ordinary care? I have to do this. Or is it morally optional, extraordinary? I can pass on that. And that will be different in every state of affairs. So we say in moral theology and bioethics, if you have one situation, you have one situation, right? Because one factor can change it. For example, if a person is told, well, you have this very aggressive form of cancer and we can do these various treatments, and so on. What are some more things we need? What other information do we need? Well, first of all, who is this person?
Right.
What is their state in life? Like, what is their capacity for pain? What is their financial status? Like, what is, their relationship with God? As a moral theologian, I would argue that if someone is away from God, everything is ordinary care until they're reconciled with God. So that's it. Okay, you made a good confession. Okay, good. Now we can enter into other areas of discernment, right? But who's this person? What are their responsibilities? And then specific things about the care. What is the possibility of recovery? What are the side effects of the care? There's so many factors that have to be taken into account, and the person's vocation is a huge part of this in order to come to the conclusion of whether it's optional or obligatory. And sometimes people will hear this and they'll say, well, wait, are you trying to say that the exact same procedure could be morally optional for one person but morally obligatory for another? Yes, exactly. Right. So this discernment is that essential and that's important.
Well, I think even it's very confusing for doctors and so forth, and that's why it's so important that we have these discussions in life with our family to determine really how somebody is to die as a Catholic. Because sometimes, as you mentioned, specific moral questions in Chapter 7, and we only have a few more minutes, 4 more minutes, so we really have to cover a lot. We have a lot more we could cover, but love to have you come out to the Wilmington area and speak, Father, if you're ever available, because we're so many senior citizens here, and they have so many questions. But, proxies a lot of times will end up betraying what you really wanted. And so you have to be really clear in your advanced directives, the guidelines you put in the directives, and they should come from the Catholic Church. Is that correct?
Yes. And I would say also the selection of the proxy, advanced directives are very important. I will say as a hospital consultant that when push comes to shove, especially in emergency situations, doctors will side with the proxy over the advance directives, with the assumption that if the proxy says something contrary to the directive, they will assume that the patient changed their mind. So the selection of one's proxy, this is the person that's going to make medical decisions if we lose our capacity to reason or we lose consciousness. I think the selection of the proxy is very important. A lot of people just take this for granted. Oh, it'll be my spouse. Oh, it'll be my oldest child. First of all, no, you need to have a serious conversation with them and explain what you want, what you don't want. You also have to consider the person. Are they able to do this? Your proxy might be the one that has to make the very difficult decision to suspend medical care, medical treatment. And that person has to be able to live with that, right? And there are some people, their constitution, emotional constitution, they cannot do it. So I tell parents of their adult children, please don't just assume that your firstborn can do this. Assess and evaluate. And I hate to say this as well, but there's a factor of it is, your proxy should not benefit significantly from your death. And if they do, you have to consider that it's a person of integrity. So there are a lot of factors that we spell out in the book as well, but the selection of the proxy and the advance directives are very important. Advance directives, as you were indicating, Judi, should be approved by the church. Most dioceses are getting on board and trying to provide a resource because advance directives are tricky documents. So we have to make sure that they are as directive as possible, especially in light of our faith.
Well, I've had discussions with my own diocese about it, and what I find the option that they prefer that you pick is let your proxy decide. And in my advance directive, the proxy doesn't get to decide. I give very specific Catholic directives from another archdiocese of Philadelphia. This is how Judi wants to die as a Catholic. Please don't disagree with any of these, because I think proxies can get confused. And if I have Alzheimer's for 4 or 5 years and the proxy has left the faith and he or she may think differently, it's real important that we be as specific as we can in our advance directive guidelines. And that, we can't anticipate everything that we know in the dying process, but that we really try to have consultation. Like mine has consultation with a priest friend of mine. So my husband's my proxy, but in consultation with a priest. So, this is such a new area, and it's so important that you wrote this book. And I'm sorry that we're running out of time. I could talk to you for another hour on this. But the Diocese of Charleston, your diocese has an advance directive for healthcare? So
we do, yep. Exactly, yep.
And so anybody can go on the diocesan websites of pretty much any diocese in the United States and find the USCCB directives as well as the directives in a specific diocese, correct?
That's right, yes. And another great resource nationally is the National Catholic Bioethics Center. They can provide guidance as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming on here, Father. I'd love it if you come to Wilmington and speak about this. And how can they find more information about your book and about you?
Yes. So frkirby.com is my website. The book's available through Amazon or through the publisher, TAM Books, or at anyone's local Catholic bookstore.
So could go out with a very quick prayer for the dead, if that would be okay.
Absolutely. Heavenly Father, you are the Lord of life. We thank you for this opportunity, for this fellowship and conversation to speak of the truth that you give us. Help us to have generous hearts to do all that you desire of us, and to all to joyfully do and to spread the message that you have given to us. Through Christ our Lord. Amen.
And you've been listening to Carolina Catholic here on Wilmington Catholic Radio, and may God be with you till we meet again. Bye-bye.